"You're nothing but dead weight in this house," my son-in-law Derek said to my face on Christmas Eve, while I was standing in their kitchen cooking a holiday dinner for 12 people. My daughter Sandra stood right beside him and said nothing. Not one word. That night, I packed my bag, walked out into the cold Arizona air, and started making phone calls. I canceled the $34,000 European tour I'd booked for their anniversary. I froze their access to my accounts. And then I did something they never imagined. I was capable of doing something that changed every single calculation they'd been quietly making about my future. But that was only the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. The rosemary chicken had been in the oven for 40 minutes when it started. I'd arrived at Sandra and Derek's house in Flagstaff 2 days before Christmas, suitcase in the trunk of my old Buick, arms loaded with grocery bags because Sandra had mentioned almost as an afterthought in a text message that she hadn't had time to shop. So I'd stopped at the grocery store on the way in. Prime rib for the main course, ingredients for my late wife Carol's green bean casserole, 3 kinds of pie, eggnog from scratch because Derek's mother always complained about the store-bought kind. I'd spent 4 hours in that store. I spent $340. Nobody offered to help carry the bags inside. I didn't say anything about that. I never said anything. That was my way. The way I'd trained myself to operate over the 6 years since Carol passed. The years I'd spent making myself useful, making myself small enough to fit into the corners of my daughter's life without taking up too much space. I was unpacking the last of the groceries when Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone in hand, barely glancing up. "Oh, you got cream cheese?" I needed the regular kind, not the low-fat. "I can go back," I said. "Never mind. It's fine." She disappeared again. Their house was a 4-bedroom colonial on the east side of Flagstaff, a house I'd helped them purchase 7 years ago when Derek's construction business was still finding its footing. $60,000 as a down payment gift. Not a loan. A gift, given freely, wrapped in the belief that helping your children stand up was the most natural thing a father could do. Carol and I had talked about it for weeks before signing the check. She'd cried a little when we did. "Happy tears," she said. Watching Sandra's face light up when she got the keys was worth every penny. Carol had been right about a lot of things. She hadn't lived long enough to see how this particular investment turned out. I started the rosemary chicken around 2 in the afternoon. Derek's parents were coming at 6. Sandra's college friend Patrice and her husband were coming. My neighbor from back home in Tucson, Bill, had driven up just to spend the holiday with me since his own kids lived out of state. 12 people total. I'd offered to cook. Sandra had accepted without hesitation. I was elbow deep in bread stuffing when Derek came into the kitchen. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with the particular confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone he respected. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bottle I'd brought, not his bottle, mine, from the bag of gifts I'd unloaded from my car, and leaned against the counter watching me work. "You know," he said, swirling the glass, "Sandra and I were talking last night." "About what?" I kept chopping. "About the living situation. About how this arrangement has been going." The arrangement he was referring to was the fact that for the past 8 months, since a pipe had burst in my Tucson condo and the repairs had taken far longer than expected, I'd been staying in their guest room. I'd offered to pay rent. Derek had waived it off the first week. By the second month, he'd stopped waiving it off and started accepting the $800. I slipped in an envelope on the first of every month. By month 5, he'd started making comments about groceries I'd eaten and utilities I'd run up. I started buying my own groceries and keeping them on a separate shelf in the refrigerator he and I had both gone in on that I had mostly gone in on when they'd moved in. "I appreciate you letting me stay while the condo was being repaired," I said carefully. The contractor said 2 more weeks. "That's not really the issue." Derek set down his glass. "The issue is that even when you're not staying here, you're always around. Every holiday, every weekend, Sandra feels like she can't have her own life because you're always inserting yourself." I stopped chopping. "I insert myself," I said, "by cooking Christmas dinner. You insert yourself by showing up without being asked, by making everything about you, by acting like your presence here is some kind of gift we should be grateful for." He crossed his arms. "Honestly, Frank, you're dead weight in this family. You're a charity case we've been carrying for years, and Sandra and I are tired of it." The kitchen went quiet. The oven hummed. Somewhere in the house, I could hear the television playing in the living room, one of the grandkids watching cartoons. Sandra appeared in the doorway. She must have heard. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the floor, and then she said, "Derek's right, Dad. We just need some space." That was it. That was all she said. No pushback. No, that's a little harsh. Just Derek's right, Dad. I was 67 years old. I'd worked for 31 years as a structural engineer. I'd raised Sandra alone after her mother was diagnosed with cancer when Sandra was 14, working overtime and still making it to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every Saturday morning soccer game in the rain. I'd paid for her college. I'd paid for her wedding $41,000. Not that anyone had ever said thank you in a way that felt like they meant it. I'd given them a down payment on this house, the house I was apparently dead weight in. I wiped my hands on the dish towel. "The chicken needs another 25 minutes, I said. "There's stuffing in the bowl. The pie crusts are in the refrigerator." I walked past Sandra without another word. I climbed the stairs to the guest room, the room with the broken blinds I'd offered to fix 3 times and Derek had always said he'd get to, and I pulled my suitcase out from under the bed. I packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, the photograph of Carol that lived on the nightstand wherever I slept, the folder of documents I kept in the inside pocket of my travel bag. I zipped the suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, looking at the wall. There was a crayon, drawing taped to it. My granddaughter, Emma, 6 years old, had made it for me last summer. She'd labeled it in her uncertain, oversized printing, "Grandpa's Room." She'd drawn me with a big smile and a fishing rod. I unpinned the drawing carefully and tucked it between 2 shirts in the suitcase. Downstairs, I could hear Derek's voice, low and even, explaining something to Sandra. I didn't hear her respond. I carried my suitcase down the stairs and through the living room. Emma looked up from her cartoon. "Grandpa, are you going somewhere?" "I'm going to spend Christmas somewhere a little different this year, sweetheart." She looked confused but not alarmed, the way 6-year-olds look when adults say things that don't quite fit their understanding of the world. "Will you come back?" "Of course I will." I kissed the top of her head. "Merry Christmas, Emma." Sandra was in the kitchen. She didn't come out when she heard me in the hallway. Derek was nowhere visible. I set my house key I'd had 1 cut when I arrived in August, for convenience on the side table by the front door. I picked up my suitcase and walked out into the cold Arizona evening. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. My breath came out in slow, visible clouds. My Buick sat in the driveway, frost just beginning to form on the windshield. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, started the engine, and let it warm up for a minute. Through the living room window, I could see the glow of the television. Emma had turned back to her cartoons. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. The Ponderosa Inn was 3 miles from Sandra's house, a clean, unpretentious motel with a pine log facade and a small lobby that smelled like cedar and old carpet. The night clerk, a young man who couldn't have been more than 22, looked up with mild surprise at a 67-year-old man arriving with a suitcase on Christmas Eve. "Single room," I said. "A few nights, probably." "Yes, sir. Room 8 is our quietest. End of the building." The room was small but honest. A double bed with a green comforter, a desk with a lamp that actually worked, a heater that came on with a satisfying click. I unpacked only what I needed, hung Carol's photograph on the hook beside the closet, and sat down at the desk with my phone. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was something cooler and more deliberate, the particular clarity that arrives when you've been telling yourself a story for a long time and suddenly the story runs out. I opened the airline app first. The booking was still there, right at the top of my recent reservations. King Whitmore Party, 7 nights, Rome and Paris, departing March 15th. Business class, round trip. I'd booked it in October as an anniversary gift, $34,200 on my platinum card. Sandra had cried when I showed her the itinerary. "Happy tears," she'd said. Carol's phrase in her daughter's mouth, and I had been too foolish or too hopeful to notice the difference. I pressed cancel. The screen asked me to confirm. I confirmed. The hotel reservations came next. 3 nights in Rome, 2 in Paris, 1 in London. For the layover, I'd upgraded to a full day because Sandra had mentioned once, years ago, that she'd always wanted to see the British Museum. Cancelled. 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 My phone began to buzz almost immediately. Sandra's name on the screen. I watched it ring and did not answer. I scrolled to Bill's name instead. Bill Garrett had been my closest friend for 22 years, since we'd worked together on a commercial project in Phoenix and discovered we both had the same opinion about fly fishing, and a similar contempt for people who didn't say what they meant. He'd driven up from Tucson specifically to spend Christmas with me at Sandra's place, arriving that afternoon while I was still at the grocery store. He answered on the second ring. "Frank, where are you? I'm sitting here with a glass of wine that's technically yours. Sandra says you left. I'm at a motel, the Ponderosa Inn, 3 miles from the house." A pause. "What happened?" I told him. I kept my voice flat, and even because the moment I let any feeling into it, I knew I'd lose the thread. Bill listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued most about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Derek actually said dead weight to my face. In my daughter's kitchen while I was cooking Christmas dinner for 12 people, and Sandra said nothing. She said he was right, and they needed space. Another pause, longer this time. "I'm coming to the motel. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, Frank. I'll be there in 15 minutes. You ate anything?" "Of course you haven't. I'll stop somewhere." He arrived with 2 turkey sandwiches from a gas station and a bottle of decent bourbon from the back seat of his truck. We sat at the small desk in room 8 and ate without ceremony, because that was the kind of friendship we had, the kind that didn't require ceremony to hold its shape. "You know what I never told you?" Bill said after a while. "Last 4th of July, when you cooked out at Sandra's. Derek made a comment when you went inside to get more ice. Said something about how you were always hovering." Sandra laughed. I looked at him. "You never said anything. What was I going to say? That your daughter and her husband were making fun of you at your own cookout?" He shook his head. I didn't know how, but I should have found a way. I looked out the window at the motel parking lot. Christmas Eve in Flagstaff. A few cars, yellow light on asphalt. The mountains somewhere in the darkness beyond, holding their positions the way they always did, indifferent to the small disasters of human families. "I've been telling myself," I said slowly, "that they were just stressed. That Derek was going through a hard stretch with his business. That Sandra was tired from the kids. I've been making excuses for behavior I would never have allowed from anyone else in my life." "You loved her," Bill said. "You wanted to believe she was still the person you raised. She might still be that person somewhere. But the woman in that kitchen tonight wasn't." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen. I thought about the whiskey he'd poured from my bottle while he was telling me I was dead weight. I thought about the $60,000 I'd handed over without hesitation 7 years ago, believing in his future, the way fathers believe in the futures of the people their children choose. I answered, "Frank." His voice was different than it had been in the kitchen, measured, strategic. "I think we need to talk about what happened tonight. I may have expressed myself poorly. You expressed yourself clearly enough. I was frustrated. Sandra and I have been under a lot of pressure. The business had a rough quarter and, Derek." I kept my voice very calm. "I'm not calling you back because I'm upset. I want you to know that what happened tonight was simply the last item in a list I've been keeping for quite a while. I'm not angry. I've just made some decisions." A pause. "What kind of decisions?" "I canceled the European trip this evening. The flights, the hotels, all of it. You'll be receiving confirmation emails." Silence. Then, "You can't just... The credit cards you and Sandra have been authorized on will be inaccessible as of tomorrow morning when the bank opens. That's a courtesy call, so neither of you is embarrassed at a register. Merry Christmas, Derek." I ended the call. Bill raised his bourbon glass. "To clarity," he said. I raised mine. "To clarity." The bank opened at 9 on the 26th, closed on Christmas Day. I was there at 9:05, suitcase still in the motel room, wearing my good wool coat because this also called for a certain presentation of self. The branch manager, A composed woman named Miss Patricia Holloway, with a careful, professional manner, saw me almost immediately when I explained the nature of my visit. "I want to remove all authorized users from my accounts," I told her. "My daughter Sandra Whitmore and her husband Derek Whitmore. Both cards, both checking account access." She glanced at her screen, then back at me. "Mr. Holt, that's certainly within your rights. I do want to make sure you're aware that this will affect any pending transactions." "I'm aware. The only pending transactions I'm concerned about are ones I've already initiated. The cancellations went through last night." "Are you reporting any unauthorized use or fraud?" "No. This is my decision, made freely." I looked at her directly. "My daughter and her husband have had access to my accounts for several years. I'm choosing to end that access. People are allowed to change their minds, Miss Holloway." She nodded, a small, careful nod that carried something I recognized as quiet respect. "They are indeed. Let me pull up the forms." The paperwork took 40 minutes. I signed each document with the same deliberate attention I'd given to engineering blueprints for 31 years, checking every line, making sure every detail was accurate. There is something satisfying about the physical act of signing documents that mean what they say. Walking back to my car in the December cold, I felt the particular freedom of a man who has stopped pretending. My phone rang before I'd even started the engine. Sandra's name again. This time I answered. "Daddy." Her voice was different than it had been on Christmas Eve. Something in it that I recognized as the voice she used when she wanted something softer, more careful. "I've been trying to reach you. Where are you staying?" "A motel." "You don't have to do that. The guest room is—" "Sandra, I didn't leave because I had nowhere else to go. I left because I was asked to." Derek didn't mean it the way it sounded. He's been so stressed about the business, and I think you watched him say it. "You told me he was right." A beat of silence. I was taken off guard. I didn't know what to say. "You knew what to say. You chose not to say it. I wasn't cruel about it. I wasn't raising my voice. I was simply describing what had happened, the way I would describe a load calculation to a client. These are the facts. This is what the structure will bear. I've removed your access to my accounts, Sandra. The cards won't work." "Dad." The softness was gone now. "We have a mortgage payment coming up. Derek's business account is overdrawn right now, and we've been counting on my money, on your help." "That's different." "Is it?" The parking lot of the bank was emptying slowly around me, post-holiday errands being run by people with ordinary troubles. "For 6 years, since your mother died, I have paid for your wedding, helped with your down payment, covered 2 of Derek's business shortfalls, replaced your roof after the storm 3 years ago, paid for Emma's preschool, and funded a college savings account for both grandchildren. I have paid your mortgage 4 times when Derek's business had a rough quarter. I have paid for 2 family vacations. I drove here 2 days ago with $340 of groceries to cook dinner for your guests." I paused. How much of that was help, and how much of it was dead weight carrying you? The silence on her end was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. "That's not fair," she finally said. "Sandra, I started the car. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done being a resource. I'm going to go live my life now. I'd suggest you both find a way to start living yours within your actual means." I ended the call. I sat in the bank parking lot for a minute with the engine running, watching my breath fog the windshield. Then I drove to a diner on Route 66 that Bill had mentioned a good breakfast spot, he'd said. That was actually what it claimed to be, and I ordered eggs and toast and black coffee, and I ate slowly, reading a newspaper someone had left on the next table. And for the first time in more years than I could accurately count, I did not feel the low-grade anxiety of waiting for someone else's crisis to arrive. The law office of Patterson & Cross occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian on LaRue Street, the kind of building that announces its seriousness through architecture alone. I had called from the diner and spoken to the receptionist, explaining that I needed to revise a will, and that I understood it was the day after Christmas. And yes, I understood Mr. Patterson might be unavailable, but was there any chance? Mr. Patterson was available. He'd been working the 26th for 20 years, he told me when I arrived. because people made decisions over the holidays that they needed acted on before the new year. He was a lean man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the particular patience of someone who had heard every possible version of family disappointment. His office had the same quality of serious, honest purpose as Miss Holloway's bank forms a place where what you signed actually meant something. "I want to restructure my estate entirely," I told him, settling into the chair across from his desk. "My current will leaves the majority of my assets to my daughter and her husband. I want to change that." He opened a legal pad. "What are you considering instead?" "I've been thinking about this since last night," I said. "I want to establish two separate things. First, a direct trust for my two grandchildren, Emma, 6, and Thomas, 4. College funds, health care, whatever they need through age 25. Protected, in their names, inaccessible to their parents." Patterson noted this. "And the remainder of the estate?" "I spent 31 years building structures. I built bridges, office buildings, a hospital in Phoenix that's been standing for 18 years. I want whatever I leave behind to do something that stands." I had thought about this through the long first night at the Ponderosa Inn, lying in the dark with Carol's photograph on the wall beside me, thinking about what she would have said, what she would have wanted done. "There's a veterans housing program in Tucson, Casa del Veterano. They provide transitional housing for veterans over 60 who've lost family connections. I want to fund a wing. Whatever that costs, that's the donation." Patterson was quiet for a moment. "That's a substantial redirection." My daughter told me Christmas Eve, through her silence if not her words, that she thinks I'm dead weight. I'd like to leave behind something that proves the opposite. We worked through the specifics for 90 minutes. Patterson was thorough and unhurried. He asked the right questions without editorializing, which I appreciated. When the documents were drafted, and I had read every page, the way I'd read every blueprint, I signed my name 7 times in the places he indicated. The trust for Emma and Thomas was ironclad. No parental access until the children reached majority. College disbursements would go directly to institutions, not through Sandra or Derek. The veterans' housing donation was specified and documented. What remained for Sandra was a single sentence, a bequest of Carol's jewelry, the pieces she'd grown up seeing her mother wear. As Patterson collected the signed pages, he looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Holt, in 30 years of estate law, I've seen a lot of people come in after the holidays. Most of them are angry and want to punish someone. You're the first person I can recall who seemed genuinely at peace with what they were doing." "I'm not punishing Sandra," I said. "I'm stopping enabling her. Those aren't the same thing." He nodded slowly. "No," he said, "they're not." The afternoon light was long and golden as I walked back to my car. Flagstaff in late December, the mountains clear in the cold air, the sky that particular shade of blue that only happens at altitude. I stood by the Buick for a moment, not in any hurry to be anywhere, which was itself a new feeling. My phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. "Derek says we should talk about the practical realities. He wants to meet for coffee." I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my coat pocket and drove back to the Ponderosa Inn. Bill was waiting outside my room when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee from somewhere, steam rising in the cold air. He handed me one without preamble. "She texted me too," he said. "Derek wants to meet." I got the same invitation. We stood in the motel parking lot drinking coffee, watching the light change over the San Francisco peaks. An older couple was loading suitcases into an SUV 2 spaces down, working in easy, practiced coordination, handing things back and forth without words. It made me think of Carol and I packing for road trips, the way we'd always had an efficient, wordless system. "You going to meet with them?" Bill asked. "If they want to discuss it, sure, but I'm not going to change anything. They'll make promises." "Probably. You believe them?" I considered this honestly, not cynically, not bitterly, but with the same clear-eyed assessment I gave to any structure I'd ever been asked to evaluate. What is this actually made of? What will it actually hold? "I believe Sandra might mean a promise when she makes it," I said. "I don't believe Derek means anything except getting back what he's lost. And I believe that even if Sandra means it, the pattern is what it is." You don't accidentally spend 6 years treating your father like a financial instrument. That takes sustained effort, even unconscious effort. I took a sip of coffee. The grandchildren are protected. The rest is decided. What happens between Sandra and me going forward is up to her. Bill nodded. We stood in comfortable silence. You know what I'd like to do next week? I said. What? Go fishing. That stretch of the Verde River we talked about last summer and never got to. He smiled. I've still got both rods in the truck. Of course you do. We met Sandra and Derek the next morning at a coffee shop on Humphrey Street. Bill came with me. I hadn't asked him to. He'd simply appeared at the door of room 8 at 8:45 when he knew I was leaving at 9, and I understood he was coming without either of us saying so. Sandra arrived first, alone, which surprised me. She looked like she hadn't slept well. Derek came in 2 minutes behind her, jaw set, wearing the particular expression of a man who has decided in advance that he is the wronged party in any given room. We sat. A young woman with a coffee tray took our orders. I ordered a cappuccino, a small luxury I'd often skipped when I was at Sandra's house because Derek had made a comment once about specialty coffees being a waste of money, and I had silently adjusted myself to match his preferences because that was what I did. Not anymore. Derek opened. He had clearly prepared remarks, which was somehow both understandable and sad. Frank, I think what happened on Christmas Eve got out of hand. Emotions were high. I want to be honest, I shouldn't have used those specific words. That was wrong. It was, I agreed. And I'd like to move past it. But I also think we need to be realistic about the financial situation. The mortgage, the accounts, that kind of disruption creates serious problems for us practically. And, Derek, I set down my cup. I'm not going to restore your access to my accounts. That's not what this meeting is about. He blinked. Then what is it about? I'm not sure, actually. Sandra texted me. I looked at my daughter. What did you want to say? Sandra had been quiet since she sat down. She was looking at her coffee cup, turning it slightly in her hands. There was something in her face that was harder to read than Derek's practiced negotiation. Something more real, and, because of that, more painful. I wanted to say I was sorry, she said quietly. Not because of the money. Because of what I didn't say. I know you were there, I said. I know you know. She looked up. I've been thinking about it for 2 days, about why I didn't say anything. And I think the answer is that it had gotten so normal. Derek saying things like that about you, me, not objecting. It had become so normal that in the moment I didn't even register how bad it was. She paused. That's not an excuse. I'm not offering it as an excuse. I wanted you to understand what happened. Derek made a slight movement, a small shift of weight in his chair, the subtle impatience of someone who thinks the conversation is drifting off point. I noticed it. I think Sandra noticed it too. The will is changed, I said, watching Sandra. The accounts are closed. That's permanent. But what I've set up protects Emma and Thomas directly. In their names, no one can touch it. They'll be fine. I folded my hands on the table. What I'm willing to do is maintain a relationship with my daughter and my grandchildren. What that looks like is going to depend on what you want it to look like, Sandra. Not Derek. You, Derek's expression sharpened. I'm her husband. You are, I said pleasantly. And I'm her father. And for 6 years I funded your life while you built up what seems to be a considerable amount of contempt for me. That's over. But my relationship with Sandra is not Derek's to manage. Bill took a quiet sip of his coffee. Derek stood up. He said something about disrespect, about being spoken to in a certain way, about how he'd made sacrifices too, but his voice was receding somehow, even though he was right there, because I'd simply stopped giving it weight. It moved past me like weather. Sandra was still looking at me. I want you in their lives, she said. Emma asks about you. She keeps asking when Grandpa's coming back. I'll be back, I said. For them, I'll always come back. That's the part that was never in question. Derek left first, door swinging behind him. Sandra stayed for another 10 minutes. We talked about Emma's reading progress and Thomas's new phase of only wanting to eat foods that were yellow. Small things, real things. The conversation of people who actually know each other rather than people managing each other. When she left, She hugged me at the door. Not the rote hug of someone performing family obligation. Something more careful and genuine. The hug of someone holding on because they'd realized they'd come close to losing their grip. I stood on the sidewalk and watched her car pull into traffic. "You all right?" Bill said behind me. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I am." The Verde River in January was cold and perfect. We drove down from Flagstaff on a Tuesday morning, Rod's in Bill's truck, a cooler with sandwiches and 2 thermoses of coffee. No particular agenda except the water and the time. The canyon came into view gradually as we dropped altitude, the red rock walls rising on either side like the walls of something ancient and patient. We fished from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, moving slowly along the bank, talking occasionally, mostly quiet. The trout weren't interested in us that day, which suited me fine. The point was never really the trout. In the weeks since Christmas, I had moved out of the Ponderosa Inn and into a rental casita on the north end of Flagstaff, a small adobe place with a wood stove and a view of the mountains from the kitchen window. The condo repairs in Tucson were actually finished, the contractor had called the week after Christmas, but I had looked at the finished apartment and felt very little pull toward returning. I'd called the Veterans Housing Organization to discuss the planned donation. The program director, a compact woman named Commander Elaine Ruiz, who had served 2 tours in the Navy before turning her attention to veterans experiencing isolation in old age, had cried a little on the phone, which I hadn't expected, and which had stayed with me. "We have 12 men right now on a waiting list," she told me. 12 men over 60 who have served this country and have nowhere to go because their families aren't there anymore. For one reason or another, your donation would let us build the capacity for 20 more. I'd thought about that for days afterward. 20 men who needed somewhere to belong. It seemed like the right kind of structure to leave behind. Solid, load-bearing, built to last. I had also, quietly, enrolled in a photography class at the community center. I had wanted to learn photography for years, and I'd kept putting it off because there was always something more urgent, always some family need that had a stronger claim on my Tuesday evenings. The class met Tuesday nights. The instructor was a young woman named Rosa, who was patient and genuinely encouraging with the older students. I was not especially talented. That turned out not to matter in the slightest. On the river, I was watching the current push around a flat gray rock when Bill said, "You ever think about going back to Tucson? I mean, settling back in?" "Sometimes," I said. "But I think I want to spend some time somewhere. I haven't made decisions out of habit yet. Somewhere you can make new ones." Something like that. I shifted my rod, watching the line drift. There's that trip I'd been meaning to take for 15 years. Carol and I always said we'd go to Alaska before we got too old. There's not a version of too old I'm willing to accept yet. Bill laughed. Alaska. In a retirement home or on a boat? A boat, obviously. Obviously. He reeled in slightly, adjusting his position on the bank. Carol would have liked this version of you. I let that sit for a moment. "I think she'd have gotten here faster," I said. She was always better at knowing what she was worth. The river moved past us, indifferent and clean, carrying the cold off the mountains. A hawk traced a long circle overhead. The canyon walls glowed copper and rust in the low January light. That evening, back at the casita, I sat on the small porch with a glass of red wine and the travel brochure I'd picked up at a bookstore on the way home. A thick, serious catalog of Alaska cruise routes, glaciers and ports, and the particular light of northern latitudes. I'd folded the corner of one page earlier in the week, a route through the Inside Passage, departing from Seattle in June. There was no reason not to go. There was no emergency waiting for my attention, no crisis for me to absorb and fund and smooth over. My grandchildren were provided for. My affairs were in order. My daughter knew where to find me, and she had been finding me in small ways. A text about something Emma said, a photo of Thomas in a yellow hat that matched what I'd described, and I was receiving those small contacts with neither excess enthusiasm nor residual anger, just acceptance. The plain ongoing fact of family, which is imperfect and complicated, and sometimes cruel and sometimes beautiful, and which goes on regardless. I was 67 years old. I had spent 6 years making myself useful and small, and financially indispensable to people who had eventually confused my generosity for weakness and my love for obligation. I had spent those 6 years waiting for the gratitude to come, adjusting myself to fit into the corners, and the gratitude had never come, and the corner had gotten smaller and smaller, until a man in my daughter's kitchen poured my whiskey into his glass and called me dead weight. So I had left, and I had stopped, and I had decided. The mountains held their positions in the dark beyond the porch railing, permanent and entirely unbothered by the small upheavals of human families. I opened the brochure to the page I'd marked. June in Alaska, the Inside Passage. Glaciers moving imperceptibly, the way all the best things move slowly, massively, driven by forces that don't require anyone's permission to do their work. I turned the page. I started reading. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. To hear the next story, click on the box to your left. Thank you for watching.